Okay, there we go. On silent. Right, brilliant. Okay, so yeah, this presentation is one that I've done before. So who actually develops WordPress themes here? Okay, a couple of people. What do you do then?
Just a hobby. So.
Oh right, okay.
Just
okay.
Might build theme, but.
Yeah. Well, there's some useful stuff in there. I mean, sort of what I'm going to cover sort of like is relevant for other areas as well as a bit on design too. And yourself?
I run a friend's e-commerce platform, which is based on WooCommerce.
Oh right, okay, okay. So, well, hopefully there'll be stuff that you can get out of it. Is this working? Yes, it is. The batteries are good. Okay, so I'm a WordPress developer, as I mentioned before, and I've been using WordPress for about 10 years now. And since I went freelance, I used to work for NatWest and then RBS up until 10 years ago. This year, not using WordPress at all, but I was involved in accessibility during that time. I've been doing accessibility for almost 20 years now. Originally for NatWest, I was responsible for making sure that all their public-facing websites like natwest.com and to online banking as well were all accessible to as many people as possible. NatWest were actually at the time early adopters of accessibility because we're talking turn of the century now. Then they got taken over by RBS. And I did work for RBS for a few years, but after the financial crash, which people in RBS like Fred Goodwin, etc., helped to engineer, I took redundancy, voluntary redundancy, and set up on my own. My company is Coolfields Consulting, and since then I have been building websites for people, building accessible websites for people, and actually consulting on accessibility. So initially I started building accessible websites for small businesses and for charities, and then people would come to me because they knew that I could actually build accessible websites for them. That was good. And then what I did after that for a while, and what I do right now, is I actually now train developers on how to build accessible websites. Not necessarily with WordPress, although I do a bit of that. I work with, one of the things I do is work with WordPress agencies to actually help them make sure that their output and what they're doing for their clients is accessible too. So if you've got common components that you'll put in people's websites, or you've got plugins that you use which deliver sort of forms or other things to clients' websites, I help people sort out whether or not those things are accessible. I run training courses for developers these days, and for designers and for testers that I do with another company. And so that's my day job now, is actually teaching other people how to do it. So I've got a few presentations. This one is about WordPress themes, but I've got other ones that I deliver as well. So that's me, been doing it for nearly 20 years. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about in this presentation, it's probably going to be about half an hour or so, and then hopefully there'll be a bit of time for questions afterwards, aspects around accessibility and WordPress themes. Firstly, I want to talk briefly about why accessibility is important. I'm hoping that you all understand what web accessibility is. Is there anyone who doesn't know what I mean by web accessibility, or is not sure? Okay, that's good. All right. Then I want to talk about if you've got a project where you're building a WordPress website for either your own organization or for your own hobby site or for a client, when to think about accessibility. And then I want to talk a bit about designing your theme. I'm not going to go into massive detail here because I've got another presentation about that, which I refer to, and you can go and look up the slides on and the video on that. Then we get into the little nitty-gritty about things to bear in mind when you're actually building your WordPress theme, in little tips and tricks on how to actually improve the accessibility as you're doing that. Then I want to talk about adding plugins to a website, because whilst it's nice to do everything in code, sometimes that's not always possible, or sometimes it can be quite complex. I'm actually involved in a WordPress development at the moment with a client who I've been working with for 6 or 7 years now. They are adding some new functionality to their website. I've tried to do it in code, but to be honest, it's just madness. Like, it's to do with custom post types and user roles with custom capabilities, trying to get the two joined up. So you're going to pull pull plugins in at times to actually do stuff. Sometimes, like, and I've done with other clients, I've got plugins that I just drop into every website I build, which give me useful functionality. So I want to talk a bit about the risks of adding plugins to your what was an accessible website. Then I want to talk a bit about what to tell your content authors, because sometimes if we're building a website for a client, it's not going to be us who updates the content. It's going to be some bloke who you're building the website for, or someone who works for them. Okay, and so it's important to understand how accessibility works for content authors. Right at the end, I introduce briefly a checklist which I've put together to accompany this this presentation. Literally, it is just a web page with a list of things that you need to think about, right? When you're building a WordPress theme, and to actually sort of, you can tick them off as you go. I'm quite happy to get into questions about that as well. I've written a blog post about that too, and I link to that too. So that's what's going on there. So the first thing I want to cover is why accessibility is important. This photograph is from a WordCamp London Contributor Day from a couple of years ago. Who's been to a WordCamp before? You've been, haven't you? Yeah, you. And, you know, okay, these are great conferences. If you want to learn more about WordPress, well, I mean, from here in Tunbridge Wells, WordCamp London's the obvious one. It's every year, usually in the spring, and it's effectively a 2-day conference where there are lots and lots of presentations about different aspects of WordPress. There's also a 3rd day, which is like a contributor day. So if you want to, you can contribute to actually sort of making WordPress better, not just on accessibility, but on other things that might interest you as well, whether it's theme reviews or plugins or whatever like that. If you've not been to WordCamp, I recommend it. It's a great place to meet other people who are interested in WordPress, and also it's a very good deal. So WordCamp London this year, if I remember rightly, I didn't have to pay because I was speaking. I think it's like £40 for a weekend. And it's effectively, if you go to the contributor day, it's 3 days. So it's usually either Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it's either Friday and Saturday, the contributor day, or Sunday, or maybe the contributor day on a Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And so the conference is 40 quid. And for that 40 quid, you get all the presentations, you get lunch on all the days that you go, and you get an evening meal on the 2nd day, and there's also usually an after party as well, when you get drinks tickets and everything like that. So it's actually a pretty good deal, really. Anyway, why accessibility is important? Well, as well as the obvious thing about people with disabilities, for example, people who are blind or motor impaired, or who are deaf or cognitively impaired, accessibility can help everyone. There's evidence that actually websites that are very accessible are actually easier to use than websites that are not accessible for everybody, not just people with disabilities. And when I'm talking about people with disabilities and impairments, it's actually always more people than you think. It's very obvious when you're walking down the street. If you see someone with a guide dog or a white stick, you probably make an assumption that they're blind, okay? But something like 1 in 10 of the population has some form of dyslexia. Also, colour blindness amongst men is like 1 in 8. I think it's 1 in 8 men, or 1 in 12 men. I think it is actually 8%. That's right. So it's 1 in 12 men are colourblind, and 0.5% of women. So it's 1 in 200 women are colourblind, right? But people don't advertise the fact that they're colourblind or dyslexic, just like that, because there's a stigma attached to it and everything like that. People are sort of like, don't want to be thought of as stupid or anything like that. So most disabilities and impairments are invisible. You don't know. Now, you might recognise where this photograph is. This is the steps that lead up from the northern side of the Millennium Bridge in London that crosses from the Tate Modern up to St Paul's Cathedral. Okay. Now, I actually have walked up these steps many times, but if you look, there's traffic lights at either end of this ramp, and if you actually study how people walk, most people actually walk up the ramp than up the steps. And the ramp is there obviously for people who have mobility impairments, like people who are in like mobility scooters or wheelchairs or using a Zimmer frame or whatever like that. But actually you realise that actually most people take advantage of the ramp because it's easier than the stairs. Okay, the reason why you do accessibility is another reason is because it's a legal requirement. Since 1999 in this country, it has been a legal requirement to make your websites accessible. Okay, firstly with the Disability Discrimination Act, and now with the Equality Act, which came into force in most of the UK in 2010. And it specifically says about websites, if you offer services or products or whatever like that, you have an obligation to make reasonable efforts to make your website accessible. There's not much legal action going on in this country, but actually in the States, as you might not be surprised to hear, there is a lot more legal action, and now there are an awful lot of accessibility legal actions happening in the United States, especially since last September, so almost exactly a year ago. The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Department of Justice actually confirmed, because there'd been some debate about whether or not that the ADA covered websites, and the ruling was in the end that it did. Okay, and as a result of that, one of the high-profile legal actions that happened in the States was Domino's Pizza. It's a chain. I mean, it's present in this country as well, but in the States, it's quite a big chain, and it was not possible to order certain pizzas and customize your pizzas if you were blind using a screen reader. And so there was a successful case, and Domino's got sued. They're actually fighting it now. They were taking it to the Supreme Court, and they were asked by the judge at this point, where they tried to appeal this ruling, how much it would cost to actually solve the issues. And they said it would cost them about $34,000, right, to actually fix the issues. But they decided to take it to the Supreme Court to try and get this ruling overturned. You know, what's that? Some blind people, right? Basically, yeah, it's a class action, right? Because like if you're blind using a screen reader, there's certain aspects of ordering pizzas on their website that you can't do, basically. So the reputational damage is going to be quite big, I should imagine. But there you go. But as this article says, accessibility should now be treated as a project requirement. So, bearing that in mind, when is a good time to think about accessibility? And basically, the answer is all the way through the project. Do not try and leave accessibility to the end, because as time goes by and your website, you're building or designing or whatever gets sort of more fixed in stone, it gets more and more difficult and more costly to actually remedy stuff afterwards. So think about it as any other requirement and get it right from the start. Which starts with, I just realised actually that's spelled wrong, isn't it? You're just signing. Should have got someone to proofread this. And that I delivered this to WordCamp London in April as well, when no one noticed. I just noticed now. Right?
I did, it's just internal.
Well, that probably is the case, yeah. I'll go on, you know, let him know. All right, so at the point where you're designing your website, there's some things you need to take into account before you even get to the code, right? Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I talked on this at WordCamp London in 2017, and the slides are there on SlideShare. And also, there's a video of me presenting it to WordCamp London on WordPress TV. But
could you email that slide?
I've put these on. These are all on SlideShare, and I've tweeted to the WPTW or W.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, but I'll email it to you and everything like that. But in true matter today form, I'll show you the goals.
Great.
Okay, so firstly, color contrast. Ironically, this is a phone that's designed for people with disabilities. But if you look here, all of this blue, light blue and white and text going over here, text going, over an image. That's all a real problem. Some people with poor vision would find that a really tricky site to actually read. So make sure your color contrast meets the minimum requirements. When you're designing your hover styles, make sure that you design your focus styles as well. So this is what happens. This is the actual WordCamp London site from this year. When I hover over this link, and it's got a drop-down menu, and then I'm on this, I'm hovering here. Make sure that you define the focus styles as well, because sighted keyboard users who have motor impairments, which mean they can't use a mouse or a trackpad, will actually potentially be relying on the keyboard. And if you can't see where focus is on your websites, then that's a real problem for those people. The other thing that's really important is that you make your links look like links. On some WordPress themes, this is like the default setting. This is actually from a Genesis theme, which I did some work for Genesis a few years ago to help make their themes more accessible. And this is what their default theme used to look like. It would not put out the underline on links. And so this was like the default color scheme. So people who have poor vision or color blindness will find it quite difficult to actually work out where the links are. So having the underlines, which have been there since the year dot in the web, actually make it a lot easier for everybody to understand where the links are. Now, I do get a lot of people who say, some people say to me, oh yeah, but having the underlines like that, it's a bit of a pain, isn't it? It looks horrible. But it's okay if you want to do some different style, like have a bottom border or something like that. If you want to do that in your CSS, that's fine too. As long as it's fairly obvious, as long as it's not just the color. The key thing is it's okay to use color to convey meaning, but make sure it's not the only way of conveying meaning.
So if you didn't use underline, you used bold, for instance, because I agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't understand when underlines disappeared. They just sort of went, didn't they?
Yeah.
But if you made them bold, would that be accessible without the underline, or does it need to be?
It needs to be obvious.
Underline?
The problem then, and I've seen this on a website, is that then sometimes you might want to make some text bold in a sentence to highlight, to emphasise it. And I've seen that on a website. I can't show you the screenshot because it's NDA from a company that did it. But it had a sentence where there was some text in bold at the end, which was the link, and some text in bold at the front, which wasn't a link.
But isn't the same argument true of underlining? Doesn't that mean that you can't underline anything?
Well, I would say that it's a web convention from the early days that you should never underline stuff to highlight it. Underlining means this is a link, right?
Sure.
And
design moves on, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you 1994 it was that makes sense.
Yes.
I don't think it does in 2019.
Well, design moves on, yes, but we're talking about inclusion here, in about like helping people understand what's going on, right? I'm quite happy if people want to, because I do website evaluations as well. I'm quite happy if people want to choose another way of indicating to people that this is a link. Just don't rely on the fact that the colour change, right?
That's good. Can it help to have the change of effect show only when you hover on it? If you underline it when on hover.
Well,
if somebody's
you need a
mouse or something like that.
Well, yeah.
But you need a bit of a
read with their mouse.
you need a bit of a clue that there's something going on there, really. If I'm colourblind or my eyesight is not as good as it used to be, right? Then I may not know that I need to hover in that area, right? What am I going to do? Hover over every single line of text in the page?
Well, is it always the case that colour, as you said, colour on its own isn't enough?
Yes.
But are there any safe colours that we can use that will even be visible to those with colour blindness? Are there any stark contrasts?
you need to kind of make, if you're going to go down that route, right, you need to make sure that your link text and your non-link text have sufficient color contrast between those two, whilst at the same time, both of them having sufficient color contrast with the background color. Yeah. Okay, that's the challenge. That's the challenge, right? So, you know, there are creative ways. I've seen lots of different ways of doing this, right?
Go on, what's the other thing? Apart from underline?
Well, as I said, like having styled bottom borders on.
That's just underline with different names, isn't it?
Yes, but it's a lot more easy to control what's going on.
So the visual look of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The designer can design it.
So I've seen it done where there's sort of it's almost like a gradient underneath. So you've got you know, it's not as. What people don't like about the underlines is that the line is so close to the bottom of the words that it can interfere with readability, right? Now, I have some sympathy with that. So, all right, then why not use the border bottom and just pull it further away from, and also using I've done this on a website, it's a bit of a faff, but you can actually use, what is it? You can actually do a text outline style or something like that. And so you can actually make, because most websites, when you've got like here, this obviously screenshot because I did this quite some time ago. These days on Google and Firefox, the descenders here there'll be a bit of separation between the descenders of the letters, like the bottom bit of the G and the J and what have you, and the actual link itself, right? That's not true in Internet Explorer. But certainly in Chrome and in Firefox, and I think in Safari as well. Now, if you want to, you can do that in CSS as well. So if you have the bottom border, because obviously the bottom border will be there irrespective of what the letters are doing, right? So you need to have some kind of like text shadow. That's right. You do multiple text shadows, right? Which actually then can do the same thing. So I don't mind what people do, but I would argue, and it's a specific requirement in the accessibility requirements that most people follow, that says don't rely on colour alone to convey meaning, right?
Descend is a nice word, isn't it?
It is a nice word. Discombobulation is a good word too.
You know, I've never heard descended. I've heard of descended. That's great.
Okay. Anyway, moving on, because this is here are the goals. Text justification. This is not a specific accessibility requirement, but this is can be a real problem for a lot of people. This is a paragraph of text that's left aligned, and this is what it looks like when you fully justify it, right?
Yeah.
A lot of dyslexics find a lot of problems with this because, as I've indicated here in yellow, you get this effect that's called rivers of white space effect, because what happens is the browser stretches the gaps between the words. And once you get to that on some lines, because the gap between the words on each of these lines is different, whereas the gap between the lines is constant right across that paragraph. Here, the gap between the lines, between the words is different. So here on this line, the gap between the words is much bigger. And what happens then, to some dyslexics, the gaps just take over. And I've got a friend who's dyslexic, and if she was presented with a paragraph of text like that on a website, she just wouldn't be able to read it at all. Okay?
Centre aligned?
Pardon?
Centre aligned?
It's better, but really left aligned's nicer, you know, because it creates actually quite a cognitive load for everybody. Okay, having it like that, we might, in this room, we might find it, oh yeah, I have no problem reading that. But actually, there's ways of showing that actually it creates a greater cognitive load for everybody to have fully justified text. The way it's done in newspapers is slightly different because the leading is a bit more sophisticated than in browsers. Because obviously, when you read a newspaper article, it's in thin columns and they are fully justified. But you never get the same effect because the leading's done in a different way.
Leading?
Yeah, that's the gap between the words.
Okay.
Is that curling?
Leading's space between the lines.
Ah, right. Sorry, beg your pardon. He's your man. He's got all the
So
words.
they spread the letters out in the word.
No, they're in between words. So the words in the traditional typeface will block one letters, and then they've got the gaps between.
Yeah.
That's the kerning.
Where would you end up with these rivers then?
but because they're also they stretch the they also stretch the gaps between the letters as well, and yeah, which browsers don't do.
Also, we retype them a little bit as well and replace them.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to get onto the nuts and bolts of building a WordPress theme accessibly. Okay. So firstly, though, it's worth looking at the coding standards for your theme. I mean, it's nothing to do with accessibility here. Like basically coding standards for your theme. There's a lot of really, really useful information in there. So there's a link there to look at. But there are also theme review guidelines for accessibility as well. Now, I'm going to cover some of these aspects, but what I'm going to talk about, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about is actually over and above what's in these guidelines, because these guidelines here, whilst they're a good set of guidelines, they don't cover everything that I think ought to be in there, okay? And so what I'm going to show you is effectively a superset of what's going on in here, okay? So, the first thing to say is that it's really, really important that when you're building a WordPress theme that you use semantic markup, okay? By that I mean making a paragraph a P tag, you know, having a link as an A tag, having a table marked up properly with like all the markup that goes with that. Avoiding what happens if you're building in the headless CMS world that we're getting to now, where you might actually use WordPress as your data repository and then use some React setup to actually pluck information out of the database and present it to the user. Don't just present the user with a load of divs, right? They are semantically neutral. The reason why this is important for sighted users, it does not matter at all what you do, but screen readers and speech recognition users rely a lot on the actual semantics of the elements that you put in your page, right? So the difference between links and buttons for sighted users who can use a mouse or even the keyboard is not that critical, right? But it is for screen reader users and speech recognition users.
How do screen readers read the screen? Do they go down that
well, that's
example you had with
presentation in itself, right? Okay.
That example you had with the colours,
yeah,
where you've got these sort of like teaser boxes. You've got an image, title, and a bit of text, then times 3, and then you've got a bit underneath. Would it read all of that first box, and then all the second box, and the third box?
Okay. I mean, I can go into a bit on how screen readers work. In a website, yeah, taking my laptop here, and this is also true of like Safari on a Mac as well. There are 2 main screen readers that Windows users use, which is NVDA and JAWS, and then there's also VoiceOver on Mac as well. On Android devices, there's TalkBack, and on iOS devices, there is VoiceOver, which is very, very good. So, but a laptop user and a desktop user who uses a screen reader, when they arrive at a page, right? If the screen reader will start reading the page, okay? And if you left it, it will literally read you the entire page, and it will tell you when things are a heading, it will tell you that it's a part of a table, it will tell you it's a link, it will tell you it's a button. If it's a list item, it will tell you how many in the list, there are things there are in the list. And landmarks, which we'll come on to talk about in a moment, it will talk about regions of the page, right? So, but no screen reader user will ever just sit and listen to the page and think, now, which bit am I interested in? They will go hunting for the bit. The first thing that most screen reader users do is they will go looking for headings on a page, right? So there are keystrokes that they can use because desktop and laptop screen readers are controlled exclusively with a series of keystrokes, because obviously I can't use a mouse. If I'm blind, I'm not going to be able to use a mouse or a trackpad, really, on a laptop, right? So there's a series of keys. So JAWS and NVDA, right? Once you're in the page, if you press the H key, it will take you to the next heading on the page, right? If you press the H key again, it will take you to the next heading on the page, right? So people will actually press H, and will find the headings on the page, and then to see if that's the bit they're interested in. Once they've found something they're interested in, there's a keystroke, which is the insert down arrow. I don't know what it is on the Mac, but then it will read on from where you are now, right?
So does it read all the H2s and then all the H3s and then all the...
No, it reads all the headings in the order that they feature in the
So
HTML.
there might be an
but it
H1,
will-
H2, an H3, an H2, H3. Yeah.
Yes, but it will typically tell you what level it is. So the heading hierarchy becomes quite important, because if you're writing a report in Word, using Microsoft Word or whatever WordPress processor you use, you're probably going to put headings in there, and the hierarchy sort of conveys the structure of the document, right? The same is true of a web page. Okay, so that's the first thing that people do. Now, the other thing that they can do in JAWS and NVDA is that they can tell the screen reader to give me a list of the headings on the page, right? So a little dialog box that pops up, because not all screen reader users are blind, so it's visible as well. And so then I can use the up and down arrow key to move up and down through the list of headings that are in the page, right? Once I've found one that I'm interested in, press the enter key, jumps into that particular part of the page. The other thing that people can then do as well is they can look for links that might interest them, because once I've read around a bit, I might think, all right, where can I go next? So I want to get a list of the links on the page. So there's facilities for doing that too. If I know that there's a table on a page, I might press the T key and it will take me to the next table on the page, or form elements on the page, or buttons, right? So there's all sorts of kind of like keystroke combinations that people who use screen readers will use to find the information. But one of the other things that they'll do now, which is quite a modern way of doing it, we talk about landmarks in a minute, is that they will say, okay, well, I want to look for the main content of the page. Take me to the main landmark on the page, right? Okay, and so the screen reader will. Okay, so it's important, as we'll see in a moment, that you set your landmarks up properly in your theme as well. And some themes don't do that, because this is the way that because people don't just sit and wait for it to read them. The other thing that screen reader users seldom do is to press the tab key, right? They can if they want to, and it will take them to the links and the buttons and the form elements on a page, right? But of course it misses out all the things in between. So screen reader users will seldom press the tab key unless they're in a form. Once they're in a form, they will kind of have to press the tab key to move from form field to form field to form field, right? So in a nutshell, that's how screen readers work. And the great thing about NVDA, which is free to download, by the way, if you've got a Windows machine, and it will also run on a Windows partition on a Mac, right, quite nicely, is that you can get it to print out on a screen what it's saying. And I think that's also true of Safari on a Mac as well. Certainly true of TalkBack on Android on some phones. So you can actually play around with it and see what's going on. But there are videos out there on YouTube which show you how to use screen readers, right? But the key thing is, that's why it's up front, the most important thing is use semantics. Use the right element, HTML elements, including HTML5 elements, to actually label up what's on your page, because people who use assistive technologies will actually rely on it.
Does it cope with things that are information that's changed through something like a script? So, heading could be... Okay,
that's another good question. Not quite relevant to this presentation. I don't cover this in a presentation, but suffice to say there are different techniques. There's, if you've got content that automatically updates, which is not a great idea, you need to warn people in advance that think that's happening, right? If you've got stuff that updates all the time, for screen reader users, they might not know what's going on, but for people with dyslexia, autism, Asperger's, etc. like that, any movement on a page can be really off-putting, and you'll probably find those people will just leave that website straight away, right? So that could be quite a lot of your browsing public, right? But if you've got stuff that's updated as a result, say for example, you say on an online banking, right? Or say you've got different accounts or transactions, and you're doing a transaction search. If you type in some like STAR, right, then you've got a list of transactions from when you bought coffees in Starbucks or something like that, right? So it might update the results on the page, and also there might be like showing 37 results or something like that. So there are techniques using ARIA live regions. You don't want to put lots and lots in an ARIA live region, but the bit where it says showing 37 results, you can use an ARIA live region. And whenever that text changes, it will cause an announcement to be made to the screen reader. Okay.
So ARIA Live is that an HTML5
Yes, ARIA attributes, well then it's not strictly speaking HTML5, there's a whole set of ARIA, I mean there are hundreds of ARIA attributes, some of which are useful, some of which might be useful in the future. There's no browser that supports all of them, but their ARIA attributes came in around the same time as HTML5 and they do certain things. I'm not going to have time to talk about that this time, right? Okay. One of the other key things you do is like make sure that your theme tells people what language it's in by using the lang attribute on the HTML element. So if your theme, if your content in your website is in British English, that is what you need to do, because otherwise if it's actually if it's in French or Welsh, I had to do a website a couple of years ago that I actually had to do a Welsh version of it. So I need to make it lang equals CY, okay, for Welsh. So it makes sure that the screen reader actually pronounces the words correctly. Otherwise, because obviously incorrect pronunciation can make a nonsense of what's actually written on the page. Small thing to do, but it's really important. And there's a list of the language codes here, okay.
Does WordPress do that by default?
Yeah, in the default themes, certainly the default WordPress themes, if you change the language of the site, it will do that for you automatically. But if you're rolling your own theme, of course it won't. It's something you need to add in yourself.
Okay, but if you're using if you're making a child theme
well, the answer's then maybe. Depends which bits your child theming.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's on Bones or something.
Pardon?
I wonder if it's on Bones. I mean, people don't write their start from scratch, so they always start with Bones, don't they? Oh,
well, it's funny you should say that, right? But actually, I have my own starter theme that I created. Whenever I'm creating something, I have because the number of, I mean, there are thousands of WordPress themes out there. The number of themes that actually give you accessible output it's just over 100 really that have got the accessibility tag attached to them, right? So
we should release it like a Bones version of Bones that's accessible.
I've never heard of Bones actually. But I'll check that out.
No, Bones is literally like a blank theme.
Right. Okay.
Blank.
Right.
But it's just got all the structure.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that's useful to know. But yeah, I should have a look at that.
Accessibility Bones thing.
Yeah. Right. Okay. There you go.
Bones too.
Yeah. So yeah. So yeah, in the default themes, it works properly. If you use those, then probably if you child theme the default theme.
So Genesis, for example, or you mean?
I don't know. You'd have to check. Check. Yeah. I can't speak to that. I haven't tested it recently. I did do some work with Genesis, but I can't remember whether or not that was an issue or not. It's probably been sorted. Probably all right in Genesis. Most Genesis themes are.
It's worth checking.
Yeah. Okay, so your heading strategy. We talked about the importance of headings because they're used as in-page navigation by screen reader users. So it's important that you get your headings right. There should only ever be one top-level heading, right? And that should be the equivalent of the title of the page or the post that you're in. And typically, really, it should be at the top of the main content, right? So you should have the heading. Maybe you could have a breadcrumb underneath, maybe, and then the actual content of the page. On the home page, that's kind of always going to be a special case. But throughout the rest of the site, put your H1 at the top of your content. Don't have the site title as your H1, except on the home page, maybe.
Sorry, why not?
Because then your
site title, right?
Yes,
sorry,
yeah. So it says like.
And do screen readers read metadata, or where do they get the excerpt from? They get it from
the excerpt. The excerpt of
the essence of the page, the description of the page. Do they not get?
They don't go into that stuff at all. Right. Okay. Right. So it's okay to start with other headings in the content order before the main heading. So ideally, you might have something like this. Okay, I do this, right, because I know that screen reader users are going to use headings to find bits of the page they might be interested in. So I put an invisible screen reader text heading just above my main navigation, right? So that if I'm a screen reader user and I go into the list of headings, I can always quickly find the main navigation for the page. Also, this is a landmark too. I'll come on to talk about landmarks in a minute. So that's less important now. But here is the main and meet the team, right? Okay, so this is where you should put your top level heading, and there should only ever be one.
Do screen readers take account of an element if it's been hidden?
That's a very good question, because I've assumed screen reader text here. If you actually make this display none, then it becomes invisible to screen readers as well, right? So there's a specific class, and if you look at in the default WordPress themes, all the default WordPress themes have screen reader text. If you look in there, and it's literally the class name is screen-reader-text, and it will show you the definition, right? So what that is, effectively what it does is it takes any content that's, and puts it into one pixel, put right up in the left-hand corner or something like that, right? And so you can't see it, but it's still there for screen reader users.
Sorry, can I speak clear now? So if you put embedded the style in the HTML and its display equals none, it wouldn't be read by screen readers.
That's right, yeah.
But if you then in your CSS file you define SRT as being display equals none, it will read it.
No.
So
no.
you didn't look in the CSS for display equals none.
No. Okay, right. So so I've given this H2 a class of SRT, screen reader text, right? This is my own shorthand for it, right? Okay, if in your CSS you make your SRT class display none, this heading will be completely invisible to all assistive technologies as well as sighted users, right? There is there's more than one, but there is the WordPress definition that's used in the default themes. If you go and look for in the CSS for one of the default themes for the class name of screen reader text, right? Literally screen-reader-text, right? You will see the definition there that is not display none. It just wraps everything up into a tiny square and hides. Yeah. Okay.
And how about if you use JavaScript to change the attributes within?
The attributes.
Yeah, but for example, you can change the contents itself with JavaScript.
Yeah, you can do that if you want, but
then what happens? And so if you change from one basically the equivalent display none to display or vice versa.
Well, you can, if you want to do that, you can, But if you want it to be, if you want assistive technologies like screen readers and that we're talking screen readers really, to actually take any notice of it, then display none is not going to work, right? So I can't ever see a use case where you want to change, because this heading, here's my primary navigation. No designer is going to want to have a heading just above the main navigation that says main navigation, right? So this is always going to be screen reader text, right? So I don't think you need to get JavaScript involved to do that. You can just define it as in your CSS to do that. Right?
Why does the screen reader actually need that? You've got the nav semantic markup.
Because not all screen readers actually operate in the same way. Okay. Screen reader users do the same thing, right? Okay. Using landmarks, we'll see landmarks in a moment, right? Using landmarks is a very new thing, right? And so some screen reader users who, once they realise what landmarks are, actually will start using landmarks, because it will say, show me the landmarks on a page, and it will actually list, like, this is a navigation and that's the main content, right? But other screen reader users haven't quite sussed out what landmarks are for yet, or they might be using older versions of screen readers, because although NVDA is free to download, that JAWS, which is the other industry standard screen reader on Windows machines, is an expensive product. I've got JAWS on here. I bought it 3 years ago now. It's 1,500 quid, right? So you're not going to upgrade that in a hurry, because it's £1,500 for 2 years worth of updates, right? So if I wanted to buy it again, it actually has come down in price a bit now, but it's so people will be running versions from potentially from quite a lot, because let's face it, like, we're all
sorry, they browsers in their own right.
No, they interoperate with browsers, screen readers. Like NVDA works best with Firefox. JAWS especially the older versions, works best with Internet Explorer 11, right?
Nice.
But the newer versions of JAWS are working very well with Chrome now, right? And that's really one of the reasons why IE 11, which everybody hates, right, with a vengeance, that's one of the reasons why it's still out there, is because IE 11 has quite a lot of good accessibility features in it, right? So it's typically going to be your people, either people with access needs, right? Because as I say, early versions of JAWS work perfectly with IE 11. It's built to work with IE 11, right? But actually it works quite well with Chrome now as well. And Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is the industry standard voice recognition software. So if I can't use a mouse or a trackpad, but I can actually, and I can't even use a keyboard because I have no use of my hands, I will be using probably Dragon Naturally Speaking. So I will control my entire machine with a series of voice commands, right? And that works best with Internet Explorer 11 as well. That may change in the future as well. It's working better with Chrome and Firefox now. The other reason, of course, why people are still using IE 11 is because if you work in a corporate environment, that's probably the browser that everyone's got on their machines, because the security people say, we don't want to go into these other browsers, right? I've been in environments like that. Hey?
6 insecure one.
Well, I know, but that is the reason. I work in a company 2 days a week, right? Can't tell you who, but most people still have Internet Explorer 11 as their main browser within that organisation. We're talking thousands of people in that organisation, right? That may change in the future, who knows, right? Some people use Chrome, some people even use Macs. But there you go.
Yeah. Probably,
yeah. I'm using a Windows machine, right? But I like. Anyway, so all right, with your heading structure, this is going to take for hours, this presentation.
Let's go this way.
I'm just going to say if you.
Yeah, that's right. 8:30, right, it's going to be 9:30. Okay, so in your heading strategy, right, when you're building your WordPress theme, think about your widgets, right, and make sure that the heading structure comes sensible. This is not easy to do, but remember that screen reader users will look at headings and they'll kind of imply that the heading hierarchy will tell them the structure of your web page, right? So be careful that your widgets don't appear to be sort of like subheadings of some of the last bit of content on your main area or something like that, right? So think about that.
Can you, right, sorry, another question. Can you write CSS that tells screen readers just to ignore it?
Ignore what?
Ignore the whole widget area, the whole sidebar, for example. Can you write CSS that tells screen readers not to bother reading?
Display.
Yeah, display. Why would you do that though?
Well, say it's like an advert or a visual thing or whatever, I don't know. Just saying, can you?
Yes. So we're talking about heading strategy. We'll come when we talk about editing. What you're going to tell your content authors, we'll have a look at that later briefly. Okay. We'll talk about landmarks. Let's talk about landmarks. Okay. So who uses landmarks in themes that they have built? Okay.
Probably about knowing that they would.
Yes, because who uses these HTML5 elements? Yeah. Right. Everybody does these days. So yeah, everybody uses landmarks now, because in certain situations, or in some situations, there are certain of these which are always landmarks, like nav and main. These are always landmarks, right? And but the other ones, there are rules about when they're considered landmarks by screen readers, right? But you think, okay, so what are landmarks then, right? And what they are, and if you think about it, this is like semantics. HTML5 introduced these things, and everyone's picked up and using them and everything like that. And the reason why they're there is an accessibility reason, because they are, instead of just using a series of divs, right, which you could do with class names or whatever, you're actually using nav and banner and header and whatever like that, and you're actually using the proper semantic elements to sort of like to show how you've laid out your page for accessibility reasons, right? That's why they're done like that, right? So you're doing accessibility without even realizing. Okay, here's the banner and navigation, what have you. So, and as I said, these are increasingly used by screen readers to help navigate around a page. So, if I'm a screen reader user and I'm up to speed with landmarks, when I come to a new page, because let's face it, the psychology of arriving at a page on your website or your client's website is I've arrived there either because I have followed a link on another page on that website, or I have followed a link in a search engine, or I might have typed that URL into my browser, right? So the psychology is when I arrive at that page, the bit that I'm most interested in is the content of that page, right? Because it's something that I want to read, right? If you think about that in terms of the BBC News website or the Guardian website, right? Then it's going to be, I'm finding a story that I'm interested in. When I get to that page, I want to quickly find the story, right? So this is why these landmarks are here, and screen reader users will go looking for the role equals main or the main HTML element, okay? They'll also then potentially go looking for the navigation because they've said, right, I've read that article now, what else you got? Okay, so if you want to, you can use this ARIA attribute called ARIA label to actually disambiguate your navigations, because often, especially like the BBC website, it's got multiple layers of navigation, right? So it will be a series of nav elements. So they use the BBC, a great example of this. They use ARIA label equals primary to say, and that tells a screen reader user this is the primary navigation, right? And then you can use like footer, ARIA label equals footer or something like that for the footer navigation, right?
Is the value of those labels predefined, or are they?
No, this you can do. You can put in there whatever text you want, right? And so, for a screen reader, it will be presented as a navigation, but with this text as well, right?
So it will say something like navigation primary.
Yes, or primary. Yes, exactly. Now, I can't. These ones here. Okay, this is the. Yeah, can everybody see this? I know. Right. So here, this is an old wave way of doing it, right? So originally, before these HTML5 elements gained a lot of traction, this was the ARIA way of doing it. So you have a div with a role of navigation, right? Div with a role of main. These that mean the same thing. So this is the equivalent of a nav. This is the equivalent of the main element, right? But here these are predefined. Okay. So if you're going to use roles, or you come across a theme that's got roles in, don't just change these to whatever random stuff, because then it will just make no sense at all, right? But when you've got ARIA label, you can put whatever you like in there.
And you need to put the proper word, which can be read by.
Yes. Whatever makes most sense.
Yeah.
So if this is this shows you the HTML5 and the older way of defining landmarks. Atypical, but obviously not the only page layout. So here, my header, role equals banner, nav, role equals navigation, main, role equals main, etc. Okay. There is no HTML5 equivalent for role equals search, because that is also something that a screen reader user might, if say I can't find a navigation and I can't find a bit of this web page that I'm interested in, the next thing that most people do is think, all right, is there a search inside search? I'll go and have a look in there, right? So there is no HTML5 equivalent for this, so it's worth putting that in anyway.
Can I ask, is there an accessibility reason for having search on a site? Because I've had this argument with a
Yes.
client before.
Yes.
Who was insisting they didn't want the search.
Yes.
And I tried to argue that it was an accessibility.
There's a specific accessibility checkpoint that says make sure that there are multiple ways of getting to content on your site.
Yeah.
So have the navigation and have a search is the obvious way of satisfying it. Yeah. Because like sometimes you're if you, especially if you've got a lot of drop down links and everything like that, it can be a bit of a pig to actually navigate over the screen reader.
Yeah. But also for people just
Exactly.
just for the standard users trying to find stuff sometimes.
Yes.
If they've got some of the nightmare, 4 or 5 levels of navigation or depth of navigation.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
They insist that they can't make it any narrower than that. And all the person wants to do is get to, so we work with a lot of schools, and every single school's top page is templates, very much exclusively. Apart from the homepage. Homepage is ignored because you don't take into account the homepage. But people land on the homepage for whatever reason. But people who are other than that, it's templates.
Yes.
Sometimes some schools like insist on burying it, you know, 6 levels down.
Yeah.
And you try and say to them like, you need to make that findable, but they we don't want search.
That seems bizarre.
All the time.
Yeah. Could you do me a little favour? Is there a glass? Because I'm a bit thirsty actually. Could you see if you can get me a glass of water rather than me going over there?
There's a beer in the fridge. It's Brewdog beer. We don't Brewdog.
No, I'll be fine. I'll be just some water, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Champagne as well. That's
Well, this is Tunbridge Wells, isn't it?
champagne. Well, exactly.
Okay, moving on.
It's in the kettle.
Right, talking about links. Thank you so much. Okay, skip links. These are really useful, as it says, for sighted keyboard users. Now, typically, the way that pages are laid out these days is that when you come into a page, you'll have the banner at the top, and then you'll have your navigation underneath. And sometimes, as we were just talking about, your navigation can be quite complicated. So if I'm a sighted user, sighted keyboard user, because I can't use the mouse or whatever, and I want to find a link that's down in, I want to follow a link that's down in the main content of the page, I literally have to tab through the page until I get to that link, right? So skip links are really useful because what they do is they sit at the top of the page. So it's the very first link on the page. So the very first thing, if I'm pressing the tab key, it's the very first thing that will get focus. And I mean, the best thing to do is to have it visible all the time, but really designers hate that sort of stuff. So have it so that it becomes visible when it gets focused, right? So it's that's the typical way that, if you look in all the default WordPress themes, in fact, most WordPress themes these days have these, right? And so the idea is an in-page link that skips down to the main. So a sighted keyboard user, they'll press the tab key, they'll get into the browser window and it'll say skip to content, they can press the enter key, in-page link, pops them down, and they're now into the main content of the page, right?
Is there any problem with accessibility if you use a scroll, if you use jQuery to scroll down the page or anything?
I don't know. You'd have to I'd have to test it. How do you mean scroll?
You know how
jQuery to
you can
scroll?
sometimes just, well, obviously, if you put in a link like that, it's going to go straight to the bookmark. But if you use a jQuery script to scroll down the page, and when you click it, the page will scroll up to where you want. So it gives you the movement. Is that going to be a problem?
I don't think so. Okay. I'd have to test it, right? I'd have to test it and see, but probably not.
The main content probably shouldn't be off the page anyway. So.
You hope not. Yeah. Anyway, okay, next thing, I want to talk about setting up your blog page. When you're building your theme, think about what links. Now, this is a theme, I can't remember which theme it is, right? And this is what one of the blog, where it lists all the blog posts, right, on the page. This one is this is one entry, okay, of the 10 that sit on this page, right? These two screens over here, okay, this is what in NVDA the list of the links on a page looks like. When you say to NVDA, the keystroke, give me a list of the links on the page, this is what you get, okay? So, and then I can use the up and down arrow key to move through here, okay? And it tells me the link text. And this is why it's really important that you're very careful to choose what your link text is, right? Because if we look at this here is a sort of like a magnified bit of this screen, okay, that concerns this bit here. So this is my list of links for this bit here. So if we look at the first one, I've got this image here, which is actually the featured image for that post, which is poked through into the blog index page, right? And
so that should really be photo of Koala Bear.
No, that's not where I'm going with that, because this is the link text. So this is trying to tell the screen reader this is the link text here. So it will say Koala Bear link, right? Okay. Now maybe that's relevant, maybe it isn't, right? Okay, and I'll come on to in a little while to talk about how you make this right. But the point I want to make here is that every single element here actually is a link. Now, whether or not you choose to have the featured image as a link, and we'll come on to what you should do there in a little while, right, is one thing. But this is the actual title of the blog post. Now, that definitely ought to be a link, really. Okay, and sure enough, that features over there. Having the date, now, I mean, unless you're blogging multiple times a day, right, is the date useful link? I don't think so.
This is linked to.
Well, it links to an archive page,
Yeah.
right? Okay, but
Yeah.
you know, I'm terrible. I actually write blogs for another on accessibility for another company, but I haven't written one for a couple of months, right? So this is ridiculous. Like, leave a comment. How would I know whether I want to go to the comment to leave a comment until I've actually read the article? Unless I was a spammer, of course. Then we've got the excerpt about this post, which is the bit that isn't the link. Then we've got a read more link, okay? And then we've got the categories and the tags, right? So your screen reader user is presented with an awful lot of links there, some of which are meaningful and some of which really just aren't much use at all, okay? And the key reason why I've got the full list over here, or a lot of the list, is when you think about this, the read more is also a link to this blog post, right? So here, I've actually got the title of the blog post and it's a link, which is good, right? In my link, in my screen reader list over here, I've got read more, read more, read more, leave a comment, leave a comment, leave a comment, right? There's no context because the link text is taken out of context here. So the key thing is, if you're going to do stuff like this, make sure that you make your link text meaningful so that it stands on its own. When it's taken out of context by screen reader users, it makes sense to what's going on. Also think about, you know, in this theme, sure, that might suit somebody, but like, just think about, does all that need to be links, right? Surely you could argue that the categories should be, right? But the date and like here,
so how do you, like, I've seen this before where people say you should never have links that say like click here or read more stuff. But what do you have there? Okay, well if it says, say, like cookie policies, right? Okay. Yeah. So to agree to our cookie policy, click here, right? Yeah. Okay. So then what the link should be would be agree to our cookie policy. Make that the link, right? Yeah. But in this context. In this context, okay. Well, because like you say, you've got the link on the title. Yes. But then you've got an excerpt, and you want to have something to say after the excerpt if the person doesn't know the top one's a link because they've not put the underline on it. Yeah.
Not that the screen reader does not take.
Can I answer that question first? Short answer is that you need screen reader text in there, and a lot of the default themes do this. Okay. Right. So if you're doing it, no, it's using the screen reader text CSS definition. Right? Okay. So what happens is that it will say the title of the blog post. Yeah. Which is the screen reader text, and then the bit that says read more, right? Okay, so for sighted users, it just looks as though it says read more, but for screen reader users, it's got the title of the blog post, read more. Okay. So, or you could say read more about whatever. Like that. You say that's in CSS? Yeah, because what you do is that you make your anchor tag, right? The text in there, the link text in there, because that's what's visible, right? It's whatever's between the two anchor, the at start and the end anchor tag, right? Is the link text, right? In where it's a plain text link, right? Mm-hmm. So what you do is between the start of anchor and the end anchor, you have some screen reader text in a span. Oh, and then and then some visible text, right? Okay.
With that class SRT or whatever it is.
However you're going to do it, So if you look at how the default themes are done, and if it's got a read more, I mean, some of them just actually have the title repeated or whatever, right? But some of them, if it says read more, go and have a look underneath it in the inspector, and you'll see that it will probably have screen reader text stuffed in there as well. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sorry, what was your question?
Tooltips. They're not made use of tooltips.
Title attributes, you mean? No, don't use title attributes. Pardon?
Expand those tags.
Well, you need to make sure that they're accessible to everybody. I've got another presentation about that. There's tooltips are an absolute nightmare to do in an accessible way. Now, in forms where you've got like a question mark, because it's quite a complicated form, or people often say, I don't know what I'm supposed to put in here or whatever like that, then we're getting into the territory of little modals, right? That's the best way to treat it. So treat it as a little modal window and put focus into the mobile window, let the person read it, and then press the escape key, or have a button that says close it or something, and put focus back on it. But don't use the title attribute, it just causes all kinds of problems. A lot of screen readers will read it out, and what happens then, in WordPress 10 years ago, they would put literally the title attribute would be on every single of these links, right, mirroring what the link text said. And what you get then is that the screen reader will announce it twice every time. So it will say ISTC Southern Area, ISTC Southern Area link, right? Then March 13th, 2014, March 13th, 2014 link, right? And it's just, it's a real pain in the backside for screen readers. So in JAWS, which is, you know, the paid for product, there's a setting in there that says, don't tell me what the title attribute says, right? So you go and switch that off. And then there'll be one link that's got something really important in there, and the users won't get to hear that. So don't use the title attribute. I mentioned that again later on. The other reason for not using the title attribute is, of course, that you can only ever see the title attribute if you're using one of these. If you're a sighted keyboard user, you never get to see what's in the title attribute. And if you're on a mobile device, you never get to see what's in the title attribute. So it's just the wrong answer. I mean, it's an old wave answer. Okay. Let's carry on and talk about pagination links.
Check out the pizzas.
Why don't you? Yes, let's see. Okay, so if you're using, and this is from my own website, you have pagination links like that, fair enough. But if you think about it, those links are just numbers, literally. So a screen reader, it says 1, link, 2, link, 3, link, right? So, and using screen reader, and I think you know, some things do this now, you can add some screen reader text in there, so it actually says like page 3, page 4, link. Even just that extra word done as screen reader text. Okay, so sighted users don't see it, but for screen reader users, it's that it gets read out. Okay, but how do you do that? Right, now I put this in. One of the reasons I put this in is because this is one of my contributions to WordPress core that is still there. There's a when you create, if you use the paginate links function to get this to come out, there's in the array you can actually specify it in there, and that's how you actually do it. I'll leave it to about later. So site load. Shall I carry on whilst everyone's? Okay, so site logos. Typically, they tend to be the link to the homepage, right? So if you're creating your theme, make sure that you often get a situation like this. So you've got a link, right? But there's no link. There's no text in that link, right? So what actually happens is that when you put the image in, right, it's the alternate text, the alt attribute, right, becomes the link text here, right? So this is the right approach, because even though it's the Scope logo, Scope being the disability charity, the alternate text for that image is Scope homepage, because that's effectively the link text. And so when you're setting the alternate text for an image, if the image is actually a link, then what's important about that image is where the link takes you rather than what the image says. And if you think about Koala Bear, in that blog example I showed you, that was because that was a featured image. And we come on to talk about featured images in a minute. And so the wrong alternate text was set up in that situation. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about is where you're using icons. So depending on how they're added to the page, as it says, icons might be invisible to screen reader users, especially if they're SVG, or they might end up just causing screen readers to announce gibberish. If you're using icon fonts, then it might announce a letter or a number or a string of, like a Unicode string or something like that. I actually evaluated a website earlier this year that had it was an e-commerce site. So it had like, you could buy stuff. It was actually a wheelchair site. You could buy wheelchairs, and the button that said add to basket had a little arrow after it, and they used an icon fonts, and the number that they used to get that icon was 4, okay? So each of the links, whenever a screen reader read it out, okay, it said add to basket 4, right? Which is really confusing when you only want to buy one, right?
Right. I've got 4 baskets.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Right. So do something like this. Now, you asked earlier whether it's possible to hide stuff from screen readers, but have it visible on the page. And yes, it is. But use this with caution. You can use the ARIA hidden attribute. ARIA hidden equals true. So anything that's contained in an element with ARIA hidden equals true is hidden from screen readers and from other assistive technologies. So here, I've got my link, which is because it's the Twitter logo going on here, basically. So the Twitter logo is pulled in with a class and in your CSS somehow or other, either as a background image or using before or after. It's actually pulling in the Twitter logo. You want to hide that from screen readers, and instead you use the ARIA label equals Twitter. On a link or a button or some other active element, you can use this thing to tell screen reader users what it's for. Okay.
So basically, if it's an image, you put the context, like the text, the ARIA label in the image. If it's an icon, you put it in the link.
Yeah, yeah. But ARIA label doesn't work if it's not an active element. Okay.
What would happen in that case if you take the I tag out altogether, and that's not there?
Yeah.
And you have a piece of text in there that says click here.
Yeah.
And you've got a thing that says Twitter.
Yeah.
What does the screen reader do then? Does it say
No,
Twitter?
ARIA label overrules anything else. So if you're linked, and you need to be careful about that. That's a very good point, actually, because if your linked text in here says click here or whatever, but your ARIA label is Twitter, the screen reader will announce Twitter link, and also Dragon Naturally Speaking, the voice recognition software, will you'll say things like click on and the link text, right? So you'll be saying click here, right, to Dragon Naturally Speaking. But because Dragon Naturally Speaking takes notice of ARIA attributes as well now, right, it will think, no idea what he's talking about, right? So be very careful about how you do that. So the ARIA label completely, what it says, it's a bit of a bully, really. It says, I am the accessible label for this team. Whatever else anyone says, right? I went a bit Boris Johnson there, I think.
That's my way or my way.
I like that. Yeah, I'll put that in. The ARIA label says it's my way or that way. Okay, the bit on featured images that I thought was coming next for the last 20 minutes. Okay.
How do you fit this into half an hour?
Well, because no one asked any questions until the end. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm happy to take questions at the end. All right. So,
you're right. You're okay, carry on. We'll take a few minutes.
No, I'm fine.
You're okay.
I should just finish this mouthful then. So featured images, when they're done in a list of blog posts, sometimes they're links, sometimes they're not. This is from my own website, and here the little featured image thumbnail, it's not a link. Okay. So it doesn't fulfill any meaningful value for screen readers here. So if I've got an image that's purely decorative, then what I want is to have the alt attribute set to an empty string, which is a convention that tells screen readers to ignore that image. Okay. If you leave the alt attribute out entirely, though, what happens in some screen readers is it will read you the file name path to that image, which is not a great experience. So in a moment, I'll tell you how to get this to work nicely with featured images. But here, you've got the situation where the image, the featured image that's featuring here is not a link to anywhere. So best thing to do is to have the alt attribute.
But that conflicts with SEO advice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you want your alt text because you want the image to pop up in Google Images.
Yeah, but it's only a little thumbnail, right? I mean, what I'm saying is, if you don't want this image to be a link, right, then I recommend that you, and you'll see why in a minute, right, because otherwise, because what you're doing, if you're creating a theme, if you're creating the index.php template in your theme, right, you need to define what the alternate text for this image is going to be, right, and you've got options. Either it's going to be the title of the blog post, or it's going to be the empty string like that, or some other stuff. But you don't know because it's all generated dynamically, right? What the other approach would be to leave it and actually choose whatever alternate text is in the media area, right? If your content author has remembered to put something meaningful in there, right? So hear me out. The next one is where you've got a blog where a blog index page where the featured image is a link to the post, okay? So here, in that situation, what I want is, so the image is actually the link, the content of the link. So here, as I mentioned before, when you've got this situation where I've got an image that's the link, then the alternate text becomes the link text here, right? So if this was blank, then you'd have an empty link effectively. So what you want here is the title of the blog post as your alternate text, because the link takes you to that blog post. If you click on that image, it takes you to the blog post, right?
I was always under the impression you can't actually describe what's in the image.
Yeah, unless it's a link.
Unless it's the link.
No, I mean, yeah, there's
No, can't you do both then? Can't you have the ARIA label for the link on the A tag and then the description?
Yeah, but remember, ARIA label says it's my way or the highway. So ARIA label would override anything that's in there.
Right.
And it wouldn't read both.
No. And it's a convention, and it has been for many, many years, that when you, that's why actually doing alternate text for images is actually more complicated than you think. Because the alternate text for an image, when you put it into a web page, it should describe in words what the image is showing or what it represents, okay? Unless it's a link or a button, right?
So when it's an image within an article, it should be the description.
Yeah, that's right. Like, this is a picture of me playing a guitar in the studio, right? Yeah. So then you can say this picture of, Graham Armfield in the studio playing a guitar, right? Would be an appropriate alternate text for that. But when an image is a link or a button, then what's most important about it is not that it's me playing the guitar, it's where it's going to take me, right? Because remember the logo, the scope logo, it's going to take me to the home page, right?
So if you go back to slide, say.
Take the top of the pops.
So on this one, that image is there for context. So if that was you playing guitar and the article's about Graham playing guitar, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That image isn't a link. So why wouldn't you have alt text on it?
Oh, come on. Well, if you think about it, how are you going to know what the alternate text for that image is going to be if this is an automatically generated element?
Well, from the title of it, if it was a featured image in a post, in an archive or something, it could be the title of the post.
It's the alt text from the media library.
Yeah, but who knows what that is? If you've got your content authors adding images to the site, right, the alternate text, right, and let me move on a bit, right, and you'll see why this can be a challenge, right? So here, this is the function that I use, if you might be the one you use too, right? You've got get the post thumbnail, right? So if I'm creating a theme, I want to pull out the featured image, okay? In the arguments, you can, if you need to either set, if you want to set the alternate alt attribute for that image, you need to do it here, right? So this is the situation that I use when the image is not a link to the blog post, right? So it's the empty string, okay? If it was the picture of me playing a guitar, which is a link, then I would set that to the post title.
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't have that in there at all, it will just pull whatever is the alternate text from the media, right?
Yeah.
Which is whatever whoever put that image there put in, which may or may not be appropriate. And so, for example, or it may not be relevant, right? Because remember in that blog post I showed you before, this picture of koala bear, right? In that theme, they didn't bother to do that, right? So that image was a picture of a koala bear. I just used it to illustrate as a featured image for that post. So it says koala bear link, right?
Yeah, no,
it has nothing to do with what, you know.
I get it with the link, it's more like,
I think this conflicts with SEO because
Does a
the
bit,
thing about
yeah.
the Graham post, you're playing the guitar, you put recording layer B or whatever it was. That's within the context of the website. So you know you're in Graham's blog, you know you're reading about him playing the guitar. Whereas if that image went out into the SEO, it went onto Google, you want Graham playing the guitar. You want a different set of
Yeah, description or whatever.
They're saying you get penalised, but you don't get any bonus.
yeah.
I mean, I'm just talking about the blog index page here. In the actual post page itself, right? Then, of course, what you want, if it has the featured image at the top, then that's where you or have that image. Then that's where you put the proper
That
alternative.
still comes from the media library.
Yes. So yeah, if your content authors know what they're doing, right? But say, okay, so yeah, if it's a picture of me playing the guitar as a featured image, right, on a post that's about me recording a song, then that's relevant, right? But where if you use pictures that are metaphors, right? So, like for example, in an earlier section of this presentation, right, I said when's a good time to think about accessibility, and I had a picture of a clock, an alarm clock, right? So, what would my alternate text for that image be, right? I'm using that image as a metaphor. Now, a lot of websites do that. Okay. So, if I had a blog post about when's a good time to think about accessibility that had an alarm clock picture, what should my alternate text be? A picture of an alarm clock? It's not at all relevant to that article, is it?
No. Yeah.
Anyway, it's up to you. Okay. All right. We've got the food to go, but all right. But I'll be finished by 1:30, I promise. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna.
He's trying to do that.
I know. That was a little joke there. So I forgot the tags, man. So, all right. Make sure that when you're building your style sheet, that you don't let this happen, right? Because people actually do make the text bigger, right? Now, zooming and text resizing are two separate things in browsers. They're kind of overlapping a lot these days, but they are two separate things. Sometimes people use zooming, and what used to happen a lot with zooming is that you get horizontal scroll bars. Horizontal scroll bars are a nightmare for everybody, right? And so if people get horizontal scroll bars in a website, what they will do is they'll think, all right, solve that for a lot. I'll just make the text bigger instead, right? And so what happens there is it keeps the size of the boxes all the same, but just makes the text bigger. And that's where you get stuff like that, where you get clashing of text, because this container to contain the links was set to a fixed height. So it might be moving a bit of background here. Okay, so best practices. Make sure you define your font sizes in ends and rems. Don't use pixels, all right? Because people are still using IE. And if you define your font sizes in pixels, IE will not let you resize them, because it obeys standards. The developer has told me they want it this size, right? So it can do. Whereas, of course, Firefox and Chrome burst out of their constricts. When you're doing breakpoints for mobiles, define them in ends as well. That helps people who will zoom and anyone who's got poor eyesight that wants the text to be bigger, right? Then that means that the mobile view will start to come into play on a full-size browser window or a larger browser, browser window. So that's really, really useful. Don't fix your box heights. I mean, these days you can use grid and Flexbox and stuff like that to fix all this stuff anyway, but in the past that wasn't so easy. Whilst we're talking about zooming, don't block zooming on mobiles by having these little values in your meta viewport thing, right? Because that will actually prevent the pinch zoom in your mobile browsers. So do this instead. Yeah, sure, have the initial scale set to 1, but then don't limit it.
A lot of mobile browsers ignoring this now, but
No, not all of them.
some.
Maybe, yeah. I haven't checked it, to be honest, I haven't checked it
I think
recently.
Chrome ignores them now.
Yeah, but yeah.
Well, I think that's definitely big Chrome, if I can't remember.
I'll test that out actually. I must admit I haven't tested that recently. Okay, a bit on keyboard interaction, right? Keyboard interaction is really important for 2 or 3 user groups, but mainly 2 user groups. People who are sighted but who can't use a mouse, but can use a keyboard, right? So they have some motor ability, but not enough or accurate enough. If I've got Parkinson's or MS or something like that, I may not be able to accurately use a mouse. So I may rely on using the tab key. But also screen reader users using a laptop and desktop, it's all about keystrokes, right? So anything actionable must be able to get focus and also show that it has focus. Remember at the design stage, we talked about focus styles as well as hover styles. And the other thing is that anything actionable must be able to be actioned using the appropriate keystrokes. What that means is, for example, a link can be operated by the enter key. So if you tab to a link, press the enter key, that's how you action a link, right? But if you mark something up as a button, using the native button semantic element, then actually that can be operated using the space bar as well, okay? So if you're going to make a link pretend that it's a button, then make sure you listen out for the space bar as well, okay? Okay, I'm amazed still how many sites don't get this right. If you've got websites with drop-down navigation, just tab around the page, sees what happens, right? You know, like early versions of the default themes, like 2010, 2012, I know it's a while ago now, but the drop-down navigation just didn't work, right, with the keyboard navigation. With the default themes are generally pretty good for this stuff now. Okay. Okay, now I'm not going to go into detail about forms, except to say if you're building a contact form or changing the default comments form, the one thing I will say is to make sure that you're always put a label element next to your input field and tie the 2 together like this. Otherwise, not all screen reader users are going to know what that input's for. Okay, this is the way that you tell a screen reader user what this input's for, because it will go looking for the label, or this label. It will actually try and find the label for that.
Does it? Sorry to interrupt, because I know people type, but does it use the placeholder?
Okay, screen reader users are okay with placeholders. Placeholders are a real pain in the backside for people with cognitive impairments, right? The main reason being, well, also people with poor vision, because like by default placeholders are very light, it's light grey, and so it almost always fails a colour contrast test, right? So yeah, you can actually, even in IE, you can style a placeholder to make it darker, right? But then the usability studies find that people think, oh, there's some text in there already, I don't need to fill that in, right? So people ignore fields with placeholders in them, right? But the main reason is people who are dyslexic, autistic, etc., people with memory issues, right? And I must admit, I've done this too. You fill out a form, right, and you can forget what the form is, because as soon as you start typing, right, the placeholder disappears, right? So the placeholder is the only prompt for what that field's for, right? So why this is an issue is that twofold. Is that if a form say I put some text in a form and then I press the submit button and there's an error message that says this field is mandatory, right? That's not a good example. Numbers are not allowed in this field or something like that. But there's no, what I've already put in that field is still there. Then the prompt is invisible until I actually delete the text out of it. Okay, and people can forget what the input fields are for. So placeholders are a real nightmare, right?
But they make form design so much better.
Yes, but they make forms a lot harder to use.
Yeah.
Right. So that's good design, isn't it? Question mark.
Well, no, I get it. I get it.
Yeah. So, this is a battle I have a lot, right, with designers, okay? Because designers, they want to break stuff. They want to do something new, right? They hate conventions like having like links and underlines and using, you know, having a label above a form field. Why would you want to do that, right? Okay, but then what happens is that then people can't use the forms as easily, and people give up, right? So if you're building a website for a company that sells stuff, right, and you do stuff that means that some people just give up, then you're effectively costing your clients money. Yeah. Okay. So I'm very down on placeholders for that reason, right? So yeah, sure, use a placeholder, because placeholder, even in the HTML5 spec, when placeholders were introduced, it specifically says never use a placeholder instead of a label. It says that in the spec, right?
But it would just be nice if there was some, you know, JavaScript you could run, you know, on a page as an entirety, knowing that you were knowing who the person was that was looking at the page. So if it was someone who required labels, then you need the labels for it.
So how would I, if I had a memory issue, right, or I was dyslexic, right, how would I tell you?
Yeah, well, I have no idea. It'd be nice to know if it was possible. Maybe something.
HTTP.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, moving on. Right. Okay. I'm going to whip through these last bits now. Okay. Say no to title attributes. Right. And I've said why. Don't use the access key. It's a waste of bloody time, to be honest. Also, avoid opening new windows. If you've got a link that opens a new window, make sure you warn people that's going to happen. It's very disorientating for people if it opens a new tab, browser tab or whatever, because then when you're in a new window, the back button doesn't work anymore. So it's a lot harder for screen reader users and keyboard users to get back to where they were before. Okay, don't use tab index values that are greater than 0, because it messes up the tab order on a page, and sighted keyboard users will come around and kick your door down. Okay, try and avoid movement on a page, or if you can't avoid movement on a page, make sure you give people the means to stop it, and so it's easily fine. So if you've got animations, right, either it stops within a couple of seconds, or give someone a button that says stop the animation, right? Because otherwise people will just go away, right? I'm working with another company at the moment. They want some nice little, the designers want some nice little animation on their app, right? And I'm saying, just no. You know, like, you know, this is a mass market app. It's not for people with you know, it's for everybody, right? This app, right? If you want people to use it, don't do stupid stuff like that, right? Have a nice animation, sure, but have it end, right? Okay, a bit on plugins. Whip through this bit. Okay, so here's a lightbox. Probably we all know what they are. This particular example causes problems for people because for sighted keyboard users and screen reader users, these are things, links. If you click on that or press the enter key, it opens this big window, right, with the full size image, right? But what often happens is that focus is still on the underlying page. So now, as a sighted keyboard user, I'm miles away from actually accessing this button or even closing it, right? If I'm a screen reader user, it appears that nothing's happened, right? Because focus is still on the link, the underlying link, right? So this comes into telling people that something's, you know, so that it's going to open a new window. And in JavaScript, actually putting focus in here somewhere, right? If you're going to open a modal of some sort, because this is kind of a modal, isn't it, right? You want people to interact with these buttons and what have you. So actually use JavaScript to pull focus into this thing, right? And then people can use it. Okay, form plugins, okay? I can't remember what plugin this is. It might be Contact Form 7 actually, but don't quote me on that. So I mentioned earlier about labels being linked to input fields. Sometimes in some plugins they are, sometimes they're not. Also, when the error messages come out, do screen reader users hear them or know they're there? Sometimes, and in fact, a lot of the time, they don't know. So if I put some input in and press this button as a screen reader user, nothing happens. and that's not good because I don't know what's happened, right? And because of the way that screen readers interact with form elements, I'll be tabbing back up here, and I won't get to these error messages. So I have no idea at all why that format's a bit.
I don't want to interrupt you again, but you mentioned something earlier about the ARIA live attribute.
Yes.
So if a element like this appeared as a result of the server saying, no, sorry, I haven't got the information, can you make that be read out, or can it be?
Yes, this would make a great candidate for an ARIA live region, right? Okay. Because when you submit that form, that message would appear, and it would then read out, validation errors occurred, please confirm the fields and submit it again, right? So at least it's telling the screen reader user that something's happened, right? The other thing that you need to do is to actually, when screen reader focus lands on these input fields, as well as reading out the label, it needs to also read out the error message so that I know what the problem is, okay? Now, I haven't got time to go into how you do that here, okay? But that's something that needs to happen. Carousels are a bloody nightmare for keyboard users because sometimes they keep moving and I can't stop them. And you've got buttons for screen reader users. There's all these buttons around everything that typically don't have any labels on them. And also, there's no alternate text attached to these images. This particular one that I came across, had loads and loads of accessibility problems with it. Some of them are better. But the other thing also, you'll often find with a carousel plugin is you're tabbing around a page and it just breaks it, and you'll end up with images that go halfway across because focus will go to some text that's in the image, right? And it'll drag it across, but only halfway, and it's just a mess. So all of these things you need to test for, obviously. Cookie warnings. This is so common within WordPress. Cookie warnings, right at the bottom of the page, right? Now, how important is a cookie warning?
Really unimportant.
Pardon?
Really unimportant.
Pointless.
Utterly pointless.
Yeah, but it's
It's just a stroppy way that designers, websiters, we've got to go to the legal
Yes.
they're going to bounce this bloody cookie message.
Yes, but the causes a lot of problems though, because this is, if for sighted users, they're often done as position fixed, okay? So what happens is that they stick to the bottom of the page and start to obscure other bits of content, right? So if you're going to do it, put it at the top, right? So that people find it quickly and can get rid of it. Because most people will just say, okay, thank you, right? And end of story, right? Put it at the top, not at the bottom. Because if I want to get rid of it, then as a keyboard user, I have to tab literally all the way through the page, right to the very bottom to get to it. Okay, helping a content author get things right. So a good idea might be so content authors, if you've done the most accessible theme that you can do and you've got an accessible set of plugins, right, your content authors can bugger it up completely, right?
Generally, isn't it?
Exactly. So why not tell them, give them a little cheat sheet of things to think about, right? So tell them about the importance of, give them a list of things to do and not to do, like having links that just say click here and stuff like that. And also the importance of adding sensible alternate text to images when they put them in the pages. Okay, and if you've got a list of items, make it a list, because that's helpful for screen reader users as well. Okay, but there's also a plugin now, and I've had a hand in making this. I didn't build it, but someone saw a presentation I did in Manchester last year, and they built this plugin called, I'll show you the name in a minute, but it basically, in the preview, since most content authors, when they're looking at a page, they'll click on the preview button, you get it so it previews your page, and it flags up potential accessibility issues in the page. And if you hover over them, it actually shows you what's going on, right? So here I've got an image with an empty alt attribute. Now, I've got red and I've got yellow. Red is, things that this is real, we know this is an issue. The yellow ones are, actually this may be an issue, you just need to check it, okay? So having an image with an empty alt attribute, as we know, that's just like the screen reader convention that the screen reader will ignore that image. Now that might not be an issue, but if that is an important image, right, then it might be worth going back and actually setting the alternate attribute. This link opens a new window. Now, the plugin doesn't know whether or not you're warning people about that, but it's just warning you that this link opens a new window. Okay, I've got a link with a title attribute present, which is a big no-no because what the title attribute text will get read out as well as the link text. Also, I've got an empty heading, which sometimes you come across, and also empty paragraphs as well. So this is now a plugin. It's called the Content Author Accessibility Preview. It's not perfect, but it's worth having a go with. And also it's on GitHub as well. So if you think of ways that it could be improved, bang an issue into there. And the guy who wrote it is quite responsive to updates. I'm actually supposed to be doing something that that actually helps people to understand why these things are issues. But I haven't got around to it yet.
Cool. We're done.
Nearly. I've written a checklist, and there's the link to it, and I'll put the slides.
Can you put that in?
Yeah, yeah. And literally, it's a little checklist that says all the stuff that I've said. Okay, and that's a link to the WebAIM Million Site Survey. They did a survey with automated tools. They looked at 1 million websites, and the amount of accessible websites out there was quite shocking. And that's it.
I've got one. Is there a question? Because I'm going to quickly stop this.
Right.
I've got a question that will hopefully take us to the end. Is it everyone?